You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 88 of the DCAU Review. I'm one of your hosts, Cal, and with me are the host, our gentleman that runs our Twitter page, and my good brother, Liam. Liam, episode 88 of the DCAU Review kicking off here, and we are still covering Batman Beyond here in the new decade. That is continuing in Season 2 of Batman Beyond, and we got another great one this week, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode that we'll be covering this week is Bloodsport, which features the debut of another of the great Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery. I feel like that's one of the things going back and revisiting this show that has really stood out to me the most, and I'm sure we've talked about it on the episodes of Batman Beyond that we've reviewed, but just how freaking great and how cool the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery is, and how they didn't, and we've talked about that, and the creators have certainly spoken about how they didn't want to just do Joker Beyond and Two-Face Beyond and stuff like that. So, you know, taking sort of archetypal types of villains, super villains from maybe other comics or something, but adapting them into this Batman Beyond world and really giving them their own flavor. And this is a great example of that today.
Yeah, it's a fun episode. It does introduce the very toyetic Stalker.
Oh yeah,
to the episode. That guy actually. So there's a little trivia note here. We've talked about action figures before. We have our very own episode that we released just a few weeks back about our top 10 favorite DCAU toys, which you can hear on in the archives at DCAUreview.com. But yeah, this guy actually has a unreleased figure out there if you ever want to Google, and the neat little trivia fact for the three people in your life that may care about this. But there is a unreleased Stalker figure, has never had a figure made, but is quite toyetic, if I do say so myself. But yeah, this episode originally debuted back in October of 1999, October 23rd, 1999. Actually, we learned as we were doing some research on this episode, this actually debuted after the episode that we reviewed last week, which was Hidden Agenda, but the episodes were kind of done out of order because you can tell in this episode Max is in it, but she's not aware that Terry is Batman and doesn't know who Matt is, despite using him as a cover story in the previous episode. So
right.
neat little trivia question or tidbit that you pulled there. But Liam, before we jump into our four main categories, as we always do,
yes,
we'd like to give you that opportunity to really use those pipes, those God-given, blessed pipes of yours, in your best announcer voice to read the ever-entertaining IMDb synopsis for this week's episode.
Absolutely, and this is for the episode Bloodsport, as we mentioned, and that episode was written by Rich Fogel. It was directed by Dan Reba, and that synopsis reads as such. Batman finds himself the quarry of an augmented hunter who is seeking the ultimate challenge. And that is, in fact, a pretty succinct and correct explanation of our plot here today.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite succinct.
So yeah, basically the episode opens with, we get kind of a cold open, so to speak, with the Stalker moving into a luxurious penthouse and being a jerk to his bellhop. And from there, we kind of slowly realize that he is there to, in fact, hunt the most dangerous game of all, the Batman.
Oh, human beings.
Or man. Or yes, just man in general, as the phrase goes. But in this case, the man in question is, in fact, Batman. There's a subplot with Terry's mom, who's kind of really has her hands full at work. She's trying to take this test
that Terry deems as stupid, by the way.
Like, she's taking a test so she can get some sort of certification that will allow her to get a promotion and, we would assume make more money. And Terry's like, ugh! He's so annoyed that, like, she asks him to get groceries once in a while.
Because their father is dead.
Right.
And she's a single mom.
And it's Terry's fault that their father's dead.
Oh, boy.
I mean, it's Derek Power's fault, but hey.
Yeah, ultimately it's
anyway,
Terry's fault.
Maybe don't complain so much. to your mom.
Just stop at the gosh darn corner store, pick up some gosh darn milk for your loving mother who were slaves so that you can go to school and be Bruce Wayne's Batman.
Or just tell her you're Batman. Those are your options.
Right.
Don't be a jerk or tell her you're Batman.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah. So the plot continues as we sort of learn Batman and Stalker have this interaction. He leads him into a sort of a trap. He wants to be, his attempt obviously is to kill Batman, and we find out later on some of the backstory of the character. But we first just see that he's attempting to kill Batman. There's this ritual that he sort of performs in his penthouse suite in the top of Gotham, where he paints himself up in what did you call it?
Urban camouflage.
Urban camouflage.
But
that's right.
Urban for futuristic Gotham City. So he blends in with circuit boards and
pretty cool. It was pretty cool. We'll talk about that in design work, but then he has this interaction with Batman where he hits him with a concussion grenade of some kind that we learn later has basically allowed the Stalker to track Batman due to his cybernetic enhancements. We find out later that he has been this big game hunter. Bruce, through doing research through the Interpol files, he's this big game hunter that's been on the run for poaching in several different continents. And then the Stalker himself, after he has kidnapped Matt, in order to lure Batman to into this battle where he can hopefully kill him. He tells Matt the story of how he got his back broken by this panther. Is that what it was? A panther, I believe.
Yes.
And his back was broken in 3 different places. He was then some shadow group that they don't exactly reveal, but you have an interesting fan theory for.
We can, until I'm proven wrong, we can pretend this is some remnant of Cadmus, right?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. We learn later in Epilogue that Cadmus was around for quite a long time, and very well could have been a part of their experiments. But he's given cybernetic enhancements. And he actually goes out and kills this panther by hand.
Yes.
And then, ever since then, he's been hunting down and wanted to continue hunting things. And he sees Batman as his greatest challenge because he believes the spirit of Batman sort of passes through the greatest warriors of the concrete jungle, as he put it.
Yes.
So his goal is to kill this so-called greatest warrior spirit, which is a unique look at it. I think it's pretty cool because anytime they flesh out the fact that Batman as a legend to the normal people or to the world at large, because we obviously, the viewer, understand and are given the look behind the proverbial curtain of who Batman is.
Right.
But anytime that you create that lore of people outside of who see Batman's interactions every single day, Batman as a legend, or Batman as a rumor, or Batman is, whatever people think of him. Seeing people think his perspective of Batman is he's this dark warrior spirit that is passed around sort of, from as a mantle that lives on its own and passes through different people and different hosts.
Right.
Which is a really cool theory and a really cool way to look and makes sense. If you've never heard of Batman or you hear Batman as a legend, and that's the type of, the upbringing that you have and believing in these deep, dark spirits or things like this occurring, I think that fits well also for this character.
It's really cool, and that's something that isn't tackled as much in this version of Batman, even in the original Batman the Animated Series. The idea of him being like sort of a boogeyman, of as you say, as the Stalker says in this episode, a spirit that is there. That was a really interesting take on it. And then the ending being that Batman kind of outsmarts him. We get to see Terry, who is not necessarily a match for him physical. We get to see him kind of outthink him, and he finally remembered that he can turn invisible, and that allows him to kind of outsmart the Stalker, and he electrocutes him, which seems to fry some of the cybernetic parts in him, which causes him to hallucinate and see this terrifying panther that he's now sort of convinced that maybe Batman and this Panther, it's some sort of strange demon that's following him and torturing him, and eventually he jumps off the roof of the place where they're fighting and lands on train tracks, and then we don't see what happens, but it is certainly implied that he sort of is hit by the train, and spoiler alert, he does come back later on in the series, so this isn't the end of the Stalker, but it is, for that moment, a pretty dramatic ending, and speaks to the more superstitious side of this character.
Yeah.
And I guess the elephant in the room, we were kind of joking when we first started up the episode, is that, yes, we've talked about this before, how clearly there is some like Steve Ditko era Spider-Man just in the DNA of this show.
For sure.
And so that, yes, there are some similarities between the Stalker and Kraven the Hunter, in the sense that it's a big game hunter from across the world comes to Gotham City, or obviously in Spider-Man case it would be New York, but to attack this, who he sees as would be like the ultimate prize, the ultimate hunt. So certainly there is some homage in that, and some taken from that especially some of those original 60s Spider-Man comics as well for this character. But I really like that twist that you mentioned of him kind of being the shadowy government agency giving him these robot parts that make him sort of even more of a threat than he already would have been, and this, again, his ideology of spirits and demons sort of driving him to want to destroy Batman it's really well done. It feels like he's on some sort of strange spiritual quest when he's performing that ritual in his hotel room when the maid comes in and he yells at her to get out. It's like it feels, and in one of the scenes when he's talking to Matt right before he goes in the explanation, you see that he's wearing a headdress that is made of the Panther, with the red streak in its face. So it's really interesting to have that be like, yes, he's a hunter, yes, there's some similarities to Kraven, but also it's much more of like a spiritual thing for this guy than just being a hunter who wants to kill Batman. Yeah,
it gives him depth, like you said, and I think it really made this episode very fun for me, because I remember going into it, I was like, I don't remember the Stalker being a very good character.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're looking at it through analytical eyes now, and certainly a little bit older than the first time I saw that episode, you appreciate the depth that they give the character, and maybe the cybernetics are a little bit of a cop-out as to why or how, but the fact that they gave why or how he's an equal to Batman or stronger than Batman,
right?
But it creates tension there, and how Batman's going to defeat him, because we learned in last week's episode, Terry's, what did Max say, somewhere between 5'6" and 6 feet tall or something like that. So, and in this episode, they clearly say that he's 6'4", and so he's a hulking figure as it is, and then he's given these cybernetic enhancements on top of it, and he's knowledgeable when it comes to hunting things, and so there does create some tension there. On top of it, then he kidnaps Terry's brother,
right?
So Terry's terrified that this is going to be something that that's going to be a stain on him. He's already lost his dad. He was in charge of watching his brother Matt, and under his watch he sort of gets kidnapped. So. Yeah, all that to say, I appreciate also they didn't make this about Batman's identity. Stalker doesn't care who Batman is. He just wants to. He believes more in the spirit of Batman than the actual person it is. So it doesn't matter who it is. He's just trying to kill this version of Batman. So this is a very strong episode. I think bringing really that the sequence, and we'll talk about it in just a moment in visuals, but the sequence of Stalker retelling the tale of him versus this Panther was really, really incredible, and really that final fight scene with they bounce from trap to trap to trap to trap, and it's done so well. It feels like Terry's really cornered and he's met his match, or is about to be bested. I gave, because of all of that and just the overall enjoyment of this episode, I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10.
Yes, I also gave it a perfect 10 out of 10.
Nice.
Yeah, it's for all the reasons we mentioned. It's tremendous, and it really feels like we found another new, unique take on maybe an archetype of a villain that already exists, but really making it their own for this series.
Agreed. Justice for the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery. Those guys need some action figures, damn
No
it.
kidding.
All right, moving forward. Let's talk about animation and visuals, Liam. A lot of great visuals. We touched on a few already, but what were some of your favorite visuals in this episode?
Yeah, there's even from almost the first scene, there's this shot where the Stalker is standing out on his balcony of his hotel room, and a mosquito lands on him and drinks his blood and starts to fly away. And you just see his eyes follow it, and then he pulls out a blow dart, and you don't see it, thank God, but you hear the blow dart hit the mosquito and the dart go into a wall. So it's really, again, it's almost like a completely visual thing other than the sound effects, and it really adds to this idea of this man who is just this perfect hunter. And the way the Stalker moves as they show him jumping around and flipping from building to building. When he first confronts Batman in the museum, and he's completely covered in shadow and is kind of jumping in the rafters and on top of these large displays, and you just see it all in shadow as he's literally stalking Batman in that scene. I loved almost everything about how they visualized not just the character design itself, which is very cool and striking, but also just the way he moved, the actual animation itself. I thought the way he moves, it's very animalistic, which is not an accident. And there's a lot of ferocity when he does, confront him physically. Like, it feels like a really vicious fight is taking place.
I agree. And I think for me, the strongest visuals come in that flashback in the battle between him and the Panther. Mm-hmm. And the visual they chose to go with in the flashback, instead of doing a black and white flashback or maybe a sepia toned as we've seen in other iterations, they go with this black and red motif, which is very purposeful because of what happens later on. But at the time, it just creates this striking visual. And it's funny because I thought about it, and I guess I struggle to think. Maybe I guess you see it sort of when you're inside the Batmobile at times. You have that striking red light and the black. But I almost wish there would almost be an entire episode done like that. Like, it had me craving an episode.
Sin City
yeah, absolutely. It gives you that Sin City sort of overtone, which of course is done more in black and white. But this is red and black. But still, it just creates a different tone of things. And of course it's done intentionally because the Panther has that red highlighted stripe on his forehead, which may have been blood. I believe it was intended to be blood because he talked about how it was wounded. And then of course it overcomes him. He goes back and he attacks the same Panther, tears it to pieces. But then of course, after Batman gets the best of him and he jams his, he has that staff that he's been carrying with him, and he jams it into the trap that has Batman's foot caught, which electrocutes him. We talked about it. Fries that circuitry in his back. His whatever, I guess, hunter vision or whatever you want to call it that he's been using to track starts glitching, and it causes the scene of Batman in front of him to sort of morph into the Panther with the black and the red and the white eyes, and it's so good. And then then after he jumps off this building and lands on the train, as the train is coming towards him, the train sort of morphs into a very similar visual as well. So very, very striking, very cool. I concur with you. The Stalker design is unique. I mean, it's funny when you first see him, it's a bald dude, no eyebrows, and then in the very next scene you see him, it's a bald dude, no eyebrows, sitting in a loincloth, and you're like, this is weird. But then they add, he does the ritual, he paints himself up, and really they gave him some wristbands and sort of like ankle bands or something too, and it's a visually interesting character. It's a visually interesting episode, and I think that the traps also add a good visual to it too, because they were all different. They were all different in how they acted and reacted, and as Batman gets caught in them. But very, very strong episode, which is why I gave animation and visuals a 10 out of 10. What about you?
Very nice. Yeah, I also gave it a 10 out of 10. So we've been on the same page so far. Yes, I mean, you've already covered a lot of that flashback. The thing that stood out to me, I should say, very early on in the episode, you noticed the scar on the back of his neck and on his back. And later, and not until pretty late in the episode, does he explain that it was from a surgery. And at the end, when he's being electrocuted, you see like the scar begins to glow, because I guess the idea is that's where a lot of the circuitry is in his body, is in his spine, and so you see that scar grow and become hot, and you kind of begin to see the outline of his vertebrae, which I thought was really, really well done. The haunting things I thought was when they actually show it's all done in like silhouettes and shadows, but you see like a buzzsaw going down towards his spine. They show him on the operating table. Yeah, we were like wide awake for whatever reason.
It's like these guys couldn't give him a little anesthesia. Is this part of the like they had to torture him while doing this too?
Perhaps it was a mad scientist. But they show that, and there's after he has killed the panther with his bare hands, they kind of do a reverse coloration where again he's all in red, and then the blood on him, which is clearly the blood of the panther, is black shows up as black, where his skin shows up as red. So again, as you mentioned, those really cool visual things they did with the kind of the black and red color palette for that flashback scene. Like I said, if I didn't already say, I also gave it a 10 out of 10.
Yep.
Just absolutely tremendous, and just such a treat.
Yeah, absolutely. A pleasant surprise, like I said. It wasn't one that I had remembered sticking out. I don't even remember that sequence very well, seeing this episode too many times. So that sequence alone is worth a rewatch, in my opinion. You can pull that scene up on YouTube, I'm sure. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is music. Music is started out very strong in this episode. I feel like you can tell there is an African style, I would say. There's some native drums. There's some horns playing in the background. It sounds, like a shofar or something blowing in the background and giving that sort of African beat to it, letting you know. And I don't think they ever say what continent he's from, but I guess that's what's implied. Yeah. He's from Africa. But I thought it started off very strong, and I think it ended very strong. It wasn't necessarily needed in the middle as much. I guess there's a little bit of tension in the Matt storyline, and certainly as Terry's being pursued by Stalker in the middle of the episode, there's some good pursuit music.
Yeah.
But I felt like it fell off a little bit. I thought that there was going to be like a Stalker theme that stood out. And I think, thinking of this as we always talk about compared to Batman the Animated Series, which is what we have to do because that's where this all started. Maybe if this was an episode of Batman the Animated Series, there may have been a standout theme that played throughout, but the music isn't as heavily relied upon in Batman Beyond.
Yeah. Musically, I should mention the music was done by Michael McQuistion in this episode. It felt very similarly in a weird way to the Curare episode, where there is a certain style of music that is used, as you mentioned, the native drums. There's a little bit of chanting. There's the horns. Not your typical Batman Beyond music. There's not much electric guitar in this episode, but there isn't that like specific theme where you talk about everyone from, Joker to Poison Ivy to the Ninja had their own, pretty unique theme for their episode. And here it's like there is a certain style and a certain emotion and a certain tempo that they go with, but I wouldn't say there's like a definitive one moment where you're like, that's the Stalker theme. It's more of kind of just a general musical theme of the entire episode.
It's more of an atmosphere than it is a specific assignment.
I think that's a good way.
With that said, I think the music is strong. I think it's always a little disappointing when I compare it to Batman the Animated Series in that way, and it's not necessarily fair, but like we said, that's kind of what we have to compare it to. With that said, music very, 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 very strong. I went with a solid 8 out of 10 for music. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in the same ballpark. I went 9 out of 10. So like I said, I do think it's very strong, and I like the chase music when Terry's on the subway or the train and trying to get away from him, and the Stalker's following him on top, and then Terry kind of outwits him. Like I think they do a very good job. But yeah, it's a really strong. Like I said, I appreciate the idea of an overarching theme and style of music for the whole episode.
I agree. All right, let's move on to our final category of the day, Liam. Voice actors. We have an interesting cast today, as we always seem to do. We have a couple of familiar voices out of place, as it were, here. So let's talk about today's cast.
Yeah, so obviously, other than our main cast, we do have Ryan O'Donoghue as Matt McGinnis, who is probably the most focus he's had in any episode to date.
Agreed.
And like it is a very generic like little kid voice, but I think it works because especially once the Stalker has told you this incredibly violent and dramatic story, to have the kid just be like, cool, I think it actually kind of works in this episode.
Question, is this an actual child playing this character, or is it an adult?
I believe so. I believe it is.
Because as a compliment, it sounds like an adult doing a child voice.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very similar to like, Bart Simpson or one of those, I guess, any of the time Tara Strong does a child's voice on a cartoon, where it sounds like an adult doing a child voice.
Yeah, I believe he would. I'm wikiing the man as we speak. He was born in somewhere in the mid 80s. Wiki is not. So he's probably like a teenager when he was recording this. So he wasn't a child, certainly not the age that Matt McGinnis is portrayed to be.
So a little bit older, still obviously not a 35-year-old woman or something doing the voice, which is sometimes what you get in those instances. But as a compliment, I think that's what it comes off as, which is there's a reason why so many of the male child voices are done by middle-aged women or younger women. It's because they're able to perform and act in ways that a child may get a performance out of them that maybe a child isn't able to quite deliver. With that said, having a teenager or a younger teen at this time play that character is perfectly acceptable also, because they do a good job.
Yeah. And we also have Terry Garr returning as Mary McGinnis. Again, she has a little bit of a focus. It's mostly just her lecturing Terry about not doing his part and Terry being a jerk to her.
I felt like she was a little more animated in this episode than she's been. I mean, I think the most exposure we had from her was certainly in Rebirth. There was a big part that she played in that episode, but this kind of gives her, she's gets to express some frustration with Terry acting like a jerk, which is typical of Terry McGinnis.
Like, I don't want to start any trouble, but it seems like he's really a jerk to all the women in his life.
Wasn't he living with his dad too?
Yeah, he was.
Maybe he's got some women issues.
He's got some issues there. He doesn't believe women are people.
Maybe we should do a bonus episode of like where we sit down and do like a Dr. Phil style with each character in the DCAU. No, maybe
exposing Terry McGinnis's latent sexism. But anyway, no, she has a little bit more to do here. I wish we got a little more of her at the end, because we get like a moment of her being like, Matt, I was so worried. And then that's kind of the end of the episode.
Yeah, why was shouldn't she have been pissed off at Terry? Because Terry, not only does Terry not pick up the milk and give his mom slack for give her a bunch of crap for studying for a test to better herself in her career, but also now he's lost his younger brother to like, if they had explained it away honestly as like, oh, Matt's just making up a funny story that happened at fake Chuck E. Cheese, then okay, but that's clearly not what happened. She believes him. She believes the story that he got saved by Batman after being kidnapped. She doesn't hold Terry accountable for that.
Right. Yeah, it's again, we kind of just move on very quickly. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from her in that scene, but that's obviously not
that's not her fault.
Terry Garr's fault for that. But yeah, other than that, we have a little bit of Cree Summer as Max, but again, as we said, this was kind of produced out of order, so she's still kind of treated as a more minor character at this point. And then we have, playing the Stalker, we have one Carl Lumbly. And this is back-to-back weeks that we had a future Justice Leaguer as our main villain of the piece.
There you go.
I will say, he doesn't talk as much as Michael Rose. And he does, it's like he has a little bit of a thicker accent as the Stalker than he does as John Jones.
Correct.
So I think that helps differentiate it a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think, and I don't think that he was. Yeah, his Jean voice is unique enough. Like I feel like if Michael Rosenbaum as the Flash had only been compared to his his character last week, then if that was the only comparison that we had, then we maybe wouldn't have been as harsh on it. Because Carl Lumbly has only played the mayor of Metropolis, I believe.
Yes, in the
Speed Demons.
Yeah, Speed Demons.
Yeah.
Flash. Speaking of the Flash,
man, we're just connecting all kinds of dots here. Speaking of which, we talked about this. Is it possible that John Jones? No, it's not.
No. But there is. We should mention here that Carl Lumbly also goes on to voice the Spider, Anansi, in Static Shock, who is a African American, or maybe not African American at all, because he's just in Africa.
African, right?
He's an African man who is a superhero of Africa that Static meets on a couple of occasions. And they're both voiced by Carl Lumbly. Could this be the grandson of the Spider?
Oh,
Could
maybe.
this be, the great nephew or something?
I'm not saying
Or
that.
maybe I'm just saying, like, they sound very much alike.
I'm not seeing any evidence out there to disprove your theory at this point.
Well, I'll send this question over to Maddie and James at Watchtower Database. They can argue about it on their own time. But But I would say, comparing this last week to a different familiar voice doing an unfamiliar role, so to speak, I think Carl Lumbly does a great job. And again, he, especially going over that flashback scene that we keep coming back to. And the line that really speaks out for me for whatever reason is when he first is fighting Batman in that final beat, and he's kind of just kicking the crap out of him, and Terry keeps falling into the traps, and "You're the great Batman, the dark demon of the concrete jungle." And the way he says it, and he's getting very overconfident and almost like he can't believe how easy this is.
Does he call him pathetic? I think he calls him pathetic too. After that,
he calls him like a cat. He says, "I fought kittens with more fight than you," or something like that.
Yeah.
So he's just really begins to just berate and talk down to.
He's feeling
Batman.
himself.
Yeah, he's feeling very confident, and Terry's able to kind of turn it around in those last moments. And as we mentioned, then he begins to hallucinate and see this panther that had hurt him, and see Batman as this demon again, and it freaks him out, and he runs away. But yeah, overall, I thought the voice acting just from top to bottom really in the episode is really, really strong, and because of that, I gave it another 10 out of 10.
Nice. I don't know why I gave it a 9 out of 10. It's strong. It's very, very strong. I think you didn't have a huge cast, and there wasn't a whole lot asked of it. I think that maybe just that last scene that was just kind of confusing. And again, we talked about that's not any of the actors' faults,
right?
But it's just sort of played off as what silly Terry, you let Matt get kidnapped. So maybe that should have gone towards the plot score instead of the voice acting score. But of course, we get Kevin Conroy in this episode as well, playing a supporting role of Bruce. And it's interesting because we didn't get to really touch on this in plot, but it makes sense that this was done in production order before last week's episode, because the tone feels very much closer to what we're used to, as opposed to what we experienced last week.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that maybe this episode being the final go around for that tone is scored so high on our list here. But yeah, I ended up giving a 9 out of 10. I think that the performances are really strong. There's just not a big enough sample size of everybody, I think, for there to be, I don't know, maybe that's lame. Should I give this a 10 out of 10? It sounds like I feel like I'm talking myself into a 10 out of 10. Like, why did I only give this a 9 out of 10?
It's a swerve, bro.
You know what? For the first time in history, live on the program, I'm changing my score mid-score.
Wow.
I'm giving this a 10 out of 10 because I have no gosh darn reason to not give this a 10 out of 10.
Wow.
So, correction. Voice, 10 out of 10.
There you go.
All right, Liam. So that will bring us to our final scores here. Totaling everything up here, I have a very, very strong, maybe our very strongest Batman Beyond episode to date. I have to check back in the archives at DCAUreview.com to be sure. But this episode, for me, I'm giving it a 38 out of 40.
Wow, and I'm even slightly stronger than that at a 39 out of 40.
You know what? I think I came close to it, or maybe gave Meltdown a perfect score.
We were very high on that one. I think we were very high on a a couple of the other episodes. Certainly, Lost Soul ranked very high as well.
For sure.
So it'll be fun to check that out, and I'll tweet something this week to confirm or deny whether or not this is in fact the highest rated Batman Beyond episode.
You'd think we would? Well, we don't talk about our scores beforehand, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about rewatchability. I'd say this is a must watch.
I agree. One, obviously, it's introducing a new villain that comes back a few more times in the show. Two, it's just a darn great episode. So if it checks off both of those boxes, I think it's an automatic must watch.
I concur. So that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. Liam, thank you everyone for joining us as always and listening. Don't forget, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or probably whatever else you listen to. It's probably on there as well. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at DCAU Review. Twitter, of course, Liam's tweeting all day, every day about everything DCAU Review and DC and comic book related. We'd love to chat comics on there. And then, of course, on our Instagram page, which we are slowly building a following for, you can certainly we release clips from upcoming episodes on there. We post when the new episodes have been released, and you never know what else is going to show up on there, so be sure to give us a follow on there as well. Liam, before we go, let us talk about next week's episode. You have a preview of what we're covering for next week's episode?
I sure do. That's right, Cal. I do have a preview for next week's episode, and it is in fact the episode Once Burned, which will be the second appearance of Melanie Walker and the rest of the Royal Flush Gang.
All right, looking forward to the return of Terry's girlfriend that he likes to cheat on his actual girlfriend with.
Worst.
Dana deserves better, man.
Hashtag
Man, forever. All right, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll catch you on the next week's episode of the DCAU Review.
Farewell.